the interesting thing here is usually when this happens, they raise rates, you see mortgage rates go up. That's
Right.
not what happened this week. And I mean, we were getting quoted 6 1/8 yesterday. I don't have a read on this today on Friday. That's exciting news for people because inflation still is an issue. We know that that's their number one target. They're looking at 2%. Affordability for housing's also been an issue. So if that comes down to 6 1/8, I mean, 2 weeks ago we were north of 7. We've seen a full point drop at this point. So that to me is pretty interesting news. I think it's important news, and most importantly, I think it's going to kind of stabilize the 30-year. If you look at Logan Motoshami, I follow this guy on Instagram. I mean, he's a little bit of a nerd, but he calls 3.4 on the 10-year. 3.4, that's the Gandalf line, like thou shall not pass. And no matter what happens, it's like they get down to 3.4 and it just won't move past there. And if we see movement past there, that's where we could see demand almost explode.
Yeah,
And
you're right.
I mean that would really, I think it might even create more problems in the housing market if we have any more demand than we have now if inventory stays where it is, which we'll get into. So I like low sixes. I'm positive Pete this morning. I mean, I think it's going to be, and for the home shoppers out there, there is nothing better than seeing rates come down on a Friday. And I know you guys know why, because you've got certainty over the weekend. You lock in a home, you can lock in that rate, and that gives you certainty on your payments. And that's what a lot of people, in my view, are searching for right now. Certainty in the market.
Or even just stability, right? Like I think that that's the certainty, but knowing that the certainty is going to carry through across different levels. I think some of the stuff that we've been seeing is we get to certainty or stability in one end of it, whether it's mortgage rates or consumer confidence or whatever, and we just create instability in some of the other areas. So finding that across multiple different avenues is going to be really important for all of this to kind of get back to normal.
And so what we need to keep in mind is when the Fed raises this rate, the initial reaction and the initial reaction this week was actually a drop in that 10-year, right? And so, Lisa, to your point about stability, the 10-year has been a little wonky, which has created, up and down in the 30-year. 6.5 is where we're kind of closing this week out at. If we can get to that 3.4 number that Tom's talking about, which is where, as of the, that's where we're at right now, Tom. We're actually right below the 3.4 mark on the 10-year as we're taping this here Friday morning. You can get closer to 6. That's what we've seen throughout the year. It gets closer to 6% when we're at 3.4. But we've just seen too many of these spike up. So don't watch that federal interest rate necessarily. The 10-year dropped after they increased the 25 basis points this week, which brought the 30-year fix back down from 6.75 to 6.5. So we've got to keep our eye on the 10-year. I like where it's heading today. That's for sure.
The interesting thing I found is that it wasn't, the comments after the meeting are always interesting, right? It's like, what's going to happen next? Because that's what people want to know. And it wasn't really, he was more middle of the road than we've seen him in the past. It wasn't that like really hawkish tone that we've seen. It looks like they're kind of going to let this play out. I mean, they said here that they need more evidence to be convinced that banking sector issues alone can do the disinflationary work for the Federal Reserve, because that's still their main focus. All they're fighting is inflation right now, and it's the fact that it's more middle of the road than it has been. Because 2 weeks ago, I think Byron, I don't think you were on the show. Lisa and I were talking about it. I mean, Powell was like defiant in front of Congress. He was getting in arguments with senators, and he chilled out a little bit. So,
well, what's your take on his housing comment? And this was in the first 2 minutes of the talk. Quote: Jerome Powell said, "The U.S. housing market remains weak." Lisa, what's your reaction to that? Do you consider the U.S. housing market weak?
Nope. Well, regionally, no, right? I think that there are certain areas where maybe that is the case. And I guess it depends on what you define as weak. Is it weak in that the demand is low? No. But is it weak in the number of listings that we have to keep up with what we need? Yeah. That there is a weakness that exists, but I don't necessarily think it was the weakness he was referring to.
Yeah, NAR just added 580,000 sales to their seasonally adjusted number. What they're from 4 million in January up to 4.58 million in February, in the same week that Powell calls the housing market weak or remaining weak